My mother looked the judge straight in the eye and calmly declared that I was delusional, paranoid, and mentally unstable, that nothing I said could possibly be trusted. Then her attorney stood up and demanded control of my $40 million estate, my tech company, and every asset my grandfather had left in my name, as if I were already too broken to own my own life. I will never forget the moment my mother leaned toward me and whispered, "By the time this is over, you'll have nothing and no one will ever believe a word that comes out of your mouth." Hearing those words from the woman who gave birth to me hurt more than losing any amount of money ever could. Sitting there, surrounded by strangers who seemed ready to believe her, I honestly wondered if she had already won. But the courtroom had no idea what had happened behind closed doors just days earlier, or why I had walked in carrying something that could change everything. To understand how my own mother tried to steal my entire future, I have to start long before either of us stepped into that courtroom. I was sitting just a few feet away across the aisle. I was wearing a simple gray suit I bought off the rack 3 years ago. I did not smile. I did not cry. I did not offer her a look of pity or a look of triumph. I just watched her world collapse. In my line of work, you learn to observe without reacting. My name is Marin. I am 28 years old, and I work as a cybersecurity architect. My entire professional life, day in and day out, is dedicated to finding vulnerabilities. I hunt down the tiny, microscopic flaws in massive, complex digital systems. I look for the hidden backdoors that malicious people exploit to destroy everything from the inside out. In the digital world, if you find a vulnerability, you do not sit around and cry about it. You do not ask the system why it betrayed you. You isolate the threat. You patch the hole. You eliminate the virus. For my entire life, my mother, Fallon, was the biggest vulnerability I had. She was a walking, breathing backdoor into my sanity, a deeply toxic element that thrived on family drama, public humiliation, and absolute control. She was the kind of woman who always played the victim, always twisted the narrative to suit her needs, and always made sure I looked like the broken, ungrateful one. But as I watched her being escorted out by 2 heavily armed federal bailiffs, her designer heels clicking erratically and desperately on the courtroom floor, I felt nothing but the quiet, profound satisfaction of a system finally being purged of a fatal virus. This was family revenge in its purest, most clinical form. She tried to steal my identity. She tried to completely ruin my professional and personal reputation. She stood before a judge and tried to convince the court that I was too mentally unstable, too shattered, and too paranoid to manage my own life, let alone my inheritance. She wanted to lock me away in a sterile psychiatric ward so she could freely drain the empire my grandfather spent his entire life building. She called me paranoid. She said I was losing my grip on reality and needed her benevolent guidance. But her fatal mistake was underestimating the very paranoia she tried to weaponize against me. My professional paranoia, my obsession with verifying every single piece of data, is exactly what helped me build the invisible trap she walked right into. Seeing her face strain of color, seeing her desperate, panicked eyes darting around the room for a savior that was never coming, it was the ultimate family revenge. It was justice, cold and absolute. I watched her lawyer, a man who charged $800 an hour to bully people, silently pack his briefcases and abandon her. I watched the gallery hold their breath. But to truly understand why the woman who gave birth to me had to leave that courtroom in the back of a police cruiser, stripped of her dignity and her wealth, you have to understand how this long, bitter war actually started. You cannot understand the ending without seeing the beginning. Do you want to know what she did to me 21 years ago that set this entire chain of events into motion? I did not have a loud or chaotic childhood. I had an invisible one, which in many ways leaves a much deeper scar. Some people grow up in houses filled with screaming matches, shattered plates, and slammed doors. My early years were just silent and empty. I was 7 years old when Fallon decided that being a mother was no longer compatible with her glamorous aesthetic. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning in early autumn. There was no big fight leading up to it. There was no tearful goodbye or long explanation. I was sitting on the cold stone steps of my grandfather's grand estate, clutching a small, worn-out blue backpack that held my favorite books. Fallon was standing by her bright red sports car, carelessly tossing her designer luggage into the trunk. The air around her smelled heavily of expensive jasmine perfume mixed with the underlying, sharp scent of blind ambition. She was leaving for Europe with a wealthy tech investor she had met at a charity gala just 3 weeks prior. She walked over to me, her sharp stilettos sinking slightly into the perfectly manicured lawn, and looked down at me. She did not look at me with love, or regret, or even sadness. She looked at me with mild irritation, like I was a chore she had finally figured out how to cross off her list. She did not kneel down to my eye level. She just sighed, a long, exasperated sound. She turned to my grandfather, Adler, who was standing quietly in the doorway of the mansion. She told him that I was too boring. Those were her exact, unfiltered words. She said I was too quiet, too serious, too much like him, and it was draining her spirit. "I cannot carry a stone when I need to fly, Dad." She said it right in front of me, staring at me as if I were a piece of heavy, unappealing luggage she was purposefully abandoning at the airport terminal. She gave me a brief, one-armed hug that lasted exactly 1 second. I counted. Then she got into her car, put on her oversized sunglasses, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. From that day on, I was raised entirely by my grandfather. Adler was a brilliant, incredibly stoic man who founded Adler Tech, a massive logistics software company that revolutionized supply chain management. He did not know how to bake cookies, and he certainly did not know how to sing lullabies, but he knew exactly how systems worked. He taught me how to read basic code before I could properly write cursive letters. He taught me that logic is the only universal truth you can rely on. While other kids were learning fairy tales about princesses and magic, Adler was teaching me how to analyze data sets. He taught me how to spot discrepancies in financial ledgers. He taught me how compound interest works and, most importantly, how to understand the raw, unfiltered truth that numbers tell when people refuse to. "Code does not lie, Marin," he would tell me. We would sit in his massive leather chairs in his dark oak study, looking at glowing computer screens late into the night. "Only people lie. The numbers are pure." And no one lied quite like Fallon. Over the years, she would drift back into our lives whenever her current wealthy partner cut her off, or whenever she needed a quick infusion of cash. And when she returned, she brought my younger sister, Tamsin, with her. Tamsin was the golden child. The one who looked exactly like Fallon, who laughed loud, who threw massive tantrums to get her way, and who commanded every ounce of attention in the room. The contrast in how we were treated was a masterclass in toxic family dynamics and psychological abuse. When Tamsin turned 16, despite failing 3 of her core high school classes and crashing a friend's car while driving recklessly, Fallon bought her a brand new, custom-painted Porsche. It was a reward for simply existing. When I graduated high school a year early with a full academic scholarship to an Ivy League university, Fallon showed up to my celebratory dinner 2 hours late. She drank 3 dry martinis in rapid succession and loudly joked to the waiter that I was a lifeless nerd who would never find a husband because I cared more about servers than social events. I was the family scapegoat. I was the invisible child. My achievements were brushed off as expected and therefore unimpressive, while my mere existence was constantly treated as a burden. Tamsin was actively nurtured to be a parasite, living off Fallon's fluctuating wealth and acting as a social media influencer with zero actual influence. Meanwhile, I was left alone to build my own armor. I never fought back during those dinners. I never screamed at them. I just sat quietly, watched their behavior, recorded their words in my memory, and learned how their twisted system operated. My grandfather was my only shield, the only person in the world who saw my true worth. But shields do not last forever. On a cold, gray Thursday in late October, my shield shattered, leaving me exposed to the wolves. How was I supposed to survive what came next? Adler passed away quietly in his sleep. His heart just stopped working one night after a long day of reviewing quarterly reports. The sudden silence in the massive Connecticut house was deafening. I spent the days leading up to the funeral walking through the empty, echoing halls, feeling a profound, heavy emptiness in my chest. He was the only parent I had ever truly known. But I did not have much time to grieve in peace. For Fallon and Tamsin, Adler's death was not a tragedy to be mourned. It was a massive payday they had been anticipating for years. The official reading of the will took place in a sterile, glass-walled conference room in a high-rise law firm in downtown Manhattan. Fallon arrived wearing a sleek, form-fitting black dress that looked significantly more suited for a high-end cocktail party than a morning event. She wore dark lipstick and oversized sunglasses indoors. Tamsin sat next to her, loudly chewing peppermint gum and scrolling rapidly through her social media feeds, looking profoundly bored. They walked into that room with the smug, arrogant, victorious energy of lottery winners just waiting for the lawyer to hand them their giant novelty check. The estate lawyer, a very serious, older man named Harrison, cleared his throat and opened the thick leather binder. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I sat perfectly still at the end of the long mahogany table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, staring blankly at the wood grain. And then, Harrison dropped the bomb that shattered their entire reality. He read the clauses clearly, his voice devoid of any emotion. He stated that the entirety of the estate, including all liquid assets totaling $40 million, the downtown luxury penthouse, and 70% controlling shares of AdlerTech, was bequeathed solely and entirely to his granddaughter, Marin. Me. He left Fallon a small, fixed trust that paid out a meager monthly allowance, and he left Tamsin absolutely nothing. For 5 agonizing seconds, the room was so incredibly quiet you could hear the low, mechanical hum of the air conditioning vent in the ceiling. Then, the grand illusion broke. Fallon's perfectly crafted mask of elegant grief slipped entirely, revealing the ugly, ravenous, desperate greed underneath. She slammed both of her hands violently onto the table. Her sharp manicured nails scratched the polished wood. "This is a sick joke," she snarled, her voice losing all of its usual refined, upper-class polish. It sounded guttural. "You manipulated his senile mind, did not you? You isolated him. You manipulated my father into cutting his own flesh and blood out of the will." Tamsin actually dropped her phone. It clattered loudly against the table. Her face turned a blotchy, bright red. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping horribly against the floor, grabbed a half-empty crystal glass of water from the center of the table, and hurled it blindly across the room. It shattered loudly against the far wall, sending water and sharp shards of crystal flying everywhere. A large piece of glass bounced off the thick carpet, and a few drops of cold water splashed onto the toe of my leather shoe. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or gasp. I slowly reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a clean white tissue, bent down, and calmly wiped the water off my shoe. "You cannot do this to us," Fallon hissed, pointing a visibly shaking finger directly at my face. "You are nothing but a cold, ungrateful mistake. You have always been a mistake. I will contest this will. I will drag your name through the mud. I will burn you to the ground before I let you take what is rightfully mine." I looked up at her, my face completely neutral. I channeled every ounce of Adler's stoicism. "You can certainly try, Fallon," I said quietly, my voice steady. "But code does not lie, and neither do legally binding signatures." Harrison quickly asked them to leave the building, threatening to call building security. They stormed out, loudly cursing and throwing wild threats over their shoulders, leaving behind a trail of shattered crystal and bitter, suffocating resentment. I sat alone in that quiet conference room for a long time, looking down at the thick stack of legal documents bearing my name. I honestly thought that having the money, having the absolute legal protection of the best lawyers in the city, would finally make them leave me alone. I thought they would take their defeat and disappear. I thought the war was over before it even really started. But I had severely underestimated the terrifying lengths that drowning, greedy people will go to in order to survive. I thought I was safe. But was I truly prepared for the psychological warfare they were about to unleash on me? 3 weeks after the chaotic reading of the will, I was physically and mentally exhausted. I had just finished a grueling, high-stakes 24-hour on-call shift. I was monitoring a massive, highly sensitive security server migration for Adler Tech. My eyes were burning intensely from staring at thousands of lines of complex code in a dark room, and my body was running on absolutely nothing but stale hospital-grade espresso and fading adrenaline. All I wanted in the world was to go home to the penthouse, take a long, scalding hot shower, and sleep for a solid day straight in my own bed. When the private elevator doors opened directly to the top floor of my penthouse, I stopped dead in my tracks. The sight before me made my blood run cold. My vintage leather reading armchair, a heavy stack of my favorite, irreplaceable cybersecurity textbooks, my gym bag, and several large cardboard boxes overflowing with my personal clothes were piled haphazardly in the public hallway. It looked exactly like trash waiting to be collected by the janitorial staff. I stepped out of the elevator slowly. The deep fatigue I felt just moments ago instantly evaporated, completely replaced by a cold, sharp, laser-focused adrenaline. I walked quietly toward the heavy, custom oak door of my home. The digital smart lock screen, which I had programmed myself, was glowing an angry red. The words "access denied" flashed across the small panel. Through the thick wood, I could hear loud pop music playing inside. I heard muffled, arrogant laughter. I heard the distinct clinking of my expensive crystal wine glasses. I did not bang my fists on the door. I did not scream their names or demand they let me in. Panic is exactly what they wanted. Instead, I calmly opened my heavy work backpack, pulled out my high-powered laptop, and sat right there on my overturned leather armchair in the hallway. I booted up the system and connected to the building's central server matrix. Being a top-tier cybersecurity architect has its distinct perks, especially when you are the exact person who personally designed and installed the security grid for the entire property management company just 1 year ago. It took me exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds to bypass the amateur encryption they had tried to set up. I swiftly revoked all of their manual overrides, deleted their temporary access codes, and completely regained administrative control of the penthouse's electronic locks. For good measure, I disabled all the key cards they might have cloned and locked down the elevators on that floor so no one could leave without my explicit permission. Then I picked up my phone. I dialed 911 and spoke in the calmest, most measured voice I could muster. I requested immediate police assistance for a home invasion and trespassing incident currently in progress at my exact address. I stated very clearly to the dispatcher that the intruders were technically known to me, but that they had absolutely zero legal right, lease, or permission to be on the premises. When 2 armed police officers arrived 10 minutes later, I unlocked the heavy oak door remotely from my laptop in the hallway. We walked in together. The scene was infuriating. Fallon and Tamsin were lounging comfortably on my imported Italian leather sofa, drinking my grandfather's vintage red wine. Tamsin was actively taking selfies with the city skyline in the background, making duck faces for her non-existent fans. The exact moment the police walked into the living room, Fallon's entire demeanor shifted so violently and quickly that it almost gave me whiplash. The arrogant, entitled squatter instantly vanished. In her place stood a weeping, deeply concerned, trembling mother. "Oh, thank God you are here, officers," Fallon cried out loudly, rushing forward and pressing her perfectly manicured hands to her chest. She pointed a trembling, dramatic finger directly at me. "My daughter, Marin. She is having a severe psychotic episode. She has been incredibly paranoid lately. She is acting manic, locking us out of our family home, throwing her own things into the hallway. We just came over to try and care for her because we are so utterly terrified for her deteriorating mental state. Please, you have to help her." The 2 officers looked back and forth between us, clearly confused. Fallon was sobbing, producing real tears, playing the part of the terrified, loving mother flawlessly. I was standing there in my wrinkled work clothes, my face completely deadpan, holding the physical deed to the property and the digital access logs on my tablet. I did not argue with her. I did not defend my sanity. I simply handed the glowing tablet to the lead officer. "I am the sole legal owner of this property," I said evenly, my voice cutting through her fake sobs. These women broke in while I was at work and attempted to illegally change the smart locks. I want them physically removed from my home immediately. Numbers, digital logs, and ironclad legal documents do not care about theatrical tears. The officers reviewed the deed, looked at the time-stamped access logs proving the tampering, and sternly ordered them both out. They were given exactly 2 minutes to grab their coats and leave. As they were being escorted out into the hallway, Fallon stopped at the threshold. The tears instantly vanished from her eyes, drying up like a puddle in the desert. She looked back at me. Her gaze was incredibly cold, highly calculating, and piercing. It was not the look of someone who was defeated. It was the look of a predator recalculating a new route to its prey. She did not scream. She just smirked slightly, adjusted her designer coat, and walked to the elevator. The police forced them out of the building entirely. But as the metal elevator doors closed, a deep chill ran down my spine. She had just tested a brand new strategy. She realized she could not beat me with property law or brute force. But she had found a new, far more dangerous weapon. She was going to try to make the entire world believe I was crazy. What would be her next move in this twisted psychological game? It started subtly at first. A slow, highly insidious poison dripping quietly into the ears of everyone we knew. In the painful weeks following the penthouse eviction incident, Fallon began a relentless, incredibly coordinated smear campaign against me. She became an absolute master of gaslighting, not just trying to manipulate my own reality, but actively destroying my image to our entire extended family. She sat at her computer and sent long, deeply emotionally manipulative emails to all my aunts, uncles, and cousins. The flying monkeys of our family dynamic. The emails were absolute masterpieces of fake, dripping concern. I know this because an older cousin quietly forwarded one to me. She wrote about how the immense pressure of inheriting Adler's massive tech empire was causing my fragile mind to crack. She claimed I was suffering from severe paranoia, that I was actively isolating myself from the people who loved me, and that I was exhibiting highly dangerous, erratic behavior at all hours of the night. She even went so far as to claim I was experiencing severe auditory hallucinations and talking to the walls. Almost immediately, my phone started ringing. It was an endless barrage of calls from aunts speaking to me in slow, agonizingly soothing voices, treating me like a skittish animal. They would ask if I was remembering to take my medication. They would ask if I felt safe being alone, or if I needed to be temporarily hospitalized for my own good. It was deeply infuriating. My chest tightened every time the phone buzzed. But I forced myself to remain completely silent. I gave them polite, short answers. I knew that reacting with anger, screaming at them to leave me alone, would only serve as perfect evidence to prove Fallon's malicious point. Then, 2 weeks later, came the ultimate peace offering. A large delivery box arrived at the front desk of my penthouse building. It was beautifully wrapped in expensive silver paper with a silk ribbon. Inside the box was a high-end, incredibly expensive smart speaker, the kind that connects to everything in your house. Tucked inside was a handwritten card on thick stationery. The card read, "Dearest Marin, I know things have been very tense between us, but I am so incredibly worried about your extreme stress levels. Please use this speaker to play some calming meditation music at night. Also, I have taken the liberty of prepaying for a private consultation with Dr. Pryor, a wonderful family therapist who specializes in stress-induced delusions. Please let us get you the help you so desperately need. Love always, Mom." It was a trap. A blatant, terrifyingly obvious trap wrapped up in a pretty silver bow. Fallon was desperately trying to establish a verified medical paper trail of my supposed severe mental decline. And this Dr. Pryor was clearly supposed to be the medical professional who would officially sign off on my insanity. I did not throw the expensive speaker into the trash. Instead, I took it directly to my specialized workbench in my home office. I fired up my secure servers and ran a deep background check on this Dr. Pryor using some highly restricted digital databases I had access to. What I found in those hidden files was exactly what I expected, but still sickening to read. Dr. Pryor was not a respected, independent family therapist. He was a deeply disgraced psychiatrist who had his medical license temporarily suspended 3 years ago for accepting massive illegal kickbacks from pharmaceutical representatives. Digging just a little deeper into complex offshore financial records, I noticed a very recent, highly suspicious anonymous wire transfer. Exactly $50,000 had been deposited into a shell company registered under his wife's maiden name just 3 days after Fallon sent me the speaker. Fallon was literally buying a fake medical diagnosis. Her grand plan was horrifyingly clear. She wanted to build a bulletproof medical file proving to a judge that I was clinically insane. With that proof, she could legally petition the court for an involuntary conservatorship, seize total control of my $40 million assets, and lock me away in a facility where nobody would believe a word I said. She honestly thought I was just a scared, fragile little girl who would easily buckle under the immense psychological pressure. But she forgot one absolutely crucial detail about who I am. She forgot what I do for a living. I build impenetrable security grids. I hunt down malicious hackers for breakfast. And now I was going to completely transform her pathetic trap into my ultimate, devastating weapon. How far would I go to turn the tables on her? I knew with absolute certainty that I needed undeniable, concrete proof of her entire scheme. I needed something a federal judge could not possibly ignore or write off as a simple family misunderstanding. So I reached out to an old, highly trusted contact in the private security industry. His name was Hayes. He was a former forensic auditor turned private investigator. Hayes was a quiet, intensely focused man who communicated mostly in short grunts, drank black coffee like water, and consistently delivered flawless results. I paid him a very hefty cash retainer, handed him a secure encrypted drive, and gave him one very simple, terrifying instruction: dig into every single financial move Fallon has ever made since the exact day I turned 18 years old. Do not leave a single digital stone unturned. 2 incredibly long, anxious weeks later, Hayes sat heavily on the sofa in my living room. He did not say hello. He just silently slid a thick, heavy manila folder across the glass coffee table toward me. His face was exceptionally grim, the lines around his eyes pulled tight. "You are going to want to pour yourself a very strong drink before you read this, Marin," he said, his voice rough and low like gravel dragging across concrete. I did not pour a drink. I opened the folder. The numbers and documents staring back at me were absolutely shocking. They made the blood in my veins run completely cold. From the exact moment I legally turned 18, Fallon had been systematically and maliciously using my social security number. She had not just ruined my credit score by missing a few payments, she had completely weaponized my identity. She had taken out multiple secret secondary mortgages. She had applied for massive, high-risk business loans. She had opened several ultra-high-limit black credit cards, entirely under my name. She had built a massive shadow empire of toxic debt to fund her lavish luxury lifestyle and to pay for Tamsin's endless, sickening shopping sprees. The total amount of highly fraudulent credit currently circulating under my name was a staggering $2.5 million. Suddenly, every single piece of her crazy puzzle violently snapped into place. She was drowning. She was drowning in this massive ocean of secret, illegal debt. That was exactly why she was so desperate, so viciously hungry for my inheritance. She desperately needed that $40 million to cover her tracks before the major banks caught on and the federal authorities came knocking on her door. If she could somehow successfully prove to a judge that I was mentally incompetent, she could become my legal guardian, absorb all my vast assets, quietly pay off the $2.5 million of fraud she committed, and leave me heavily medicated and locked in a psychiatric ward, completely none the wiser. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her plan made me physically dizzy. I felt a sudden, violent surge of pure, unadulterated rage burn in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break the glass table. But I quickly boxed that emotion up and shoved it deep down. Rage is fundamentally useless in a war. Strategy is absolutely everything. I stood up and slowly walked over to the expensive smart speaker she had sent me, which was still sitting innocently on my kitchen counter. I grabbed a set of precision screwdrivers from my toolkit and carefully cracked the sleek plastic casing open. I sat there for the next 4 hours, meticulously modifying the internal motherboard. I bypassed the standard factory microphone restrictions. I completely rewired the tiny audio transmitter. I wrote and installed a custom, deeply hidden execution script. I successfully turned her pathetic Trojan horse into a highly sensitive, two-way listening device. I linked the live audio feed directly to 3 separate, heavily encrypted cloud servers that I personally controlled. Every single word spoken within 30 feet of that speaker would be instantly recorded, endlessly duplicated, and locked safely behind military-grade encryption. I carefully put the modified speaker into a sleek, expensive-looking tote bag. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the harsh fluorescent mirror. I practiced looking deeply tired. I let my shoulders slump forward heavily. I practiced widening my eyes to look like a broken, highly paranoid woman who was finally losing her absolute grip on reality. Everything was perfectly set. I was finally ready to play the exact prey she was hunting. Please leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below the name of the city you are living in. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. Will Fallon fall blindly into the trap, or will her lifetime of manipulation prove too much for Marin to handle? 3 days after the bizarre delivery of the smart speaker, my phone vibrated on the glass desk of my home office. It was a text message from Fallon. The message was carefully crafted to sound like a mother who was at her wit's end, but still overflowing with unconditional love. She asked if I would be willing to come over to her rented luxury condo for a quiet, private family dinner. Just the 3 of us, she wrote. No lawyers, no arguments. I just want to look at my daughter and know she is safe. Please let me cook for you. It was a masterpiece of social engineering. In the cybersecurity world, we call this a phishing attack. The attacker sends a benign-looking message, hoping you will click the malicious link and grant them access to your system. I knew exactly what she was doing. I accepted the invitation immediately. It was the perfect opportunity to deploy the trap I had spent hours building. I arrived right on time at 7 o'clock in the evening. The weather outside was awful, a freezing, relentless rain that made the city look entirely gray and washed out. I wore an oversized, somewhat wrinkled beige cardigan over a plain shirt, intentionally making myself look disheveled. I carried a heavy, waterproof tote bag that contained her gifted smart speaker, which I had meticulously modified into a cloud-connected recording device. The lobby of her building was an ostentatious display of fake wealth, all mirrored walls and cheap marble. I rode the elevator up to the penthouse floor, mentally rehearsing the character I needed to play. I needed to be the broken, paranoid woman she had described in all those emails to our relatives. Her condo was suffocating. The moment Fallon opened the door, the thick, heavy scent of her signature jasmine perfume hit me like a physical wall. Every surface in the living room was covered in velvet, brass accents, and overly expensive modern artwork that I knew for a fact she could not actually afford. She greeted me with a look of practiced pity, her eyes immediately scanning my messy hair and my slumped shoulders. Tamsin was lounging horizontally on the oversized white sofa, scrolling through a social media feed on her phone with the volume turned up way too loud. Tamsin barely looked up, offering only a condescending smirk when I walked in. I immediately set to work on my performance. I made sure my hands were shaking slightly as I took off my wet coat. I rubbed my eyes repeatedly so they looked red and irritated. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor, avoiding direct eye contact with either of them. I looked exactly like a woman who had not slept in a solid week, someone crumbling under the immense weight of her own terrifying delusions. Fallon guided me to the sitting area and poured me a large glass of expensive red wine. I took the smart speaker out of my bag and placed it right in the center of the glass coffee table. I hesitated, stammering slightly, and told her I brought it because I was afraid to leave it at my own penthouse. I lowered my voice to a frantic whisper, saying I thought the building management was actively listening to my private conversations through the air conditioning vents. I sounded entirely unhinged. I sounded exactly how she desperately needed me to sound. Tamsin actually laughed out loud, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the room. She did not even try to hide her cruel mockery. "You are losing your mind, Marin," she snickered, tossing her hair over her shoulder and staring at me as if I were an exhibit at a zoo. "You seriously need to be locked up somewhere nice and quiet before you hurt yourself." Fallon shot Tamsin a warning glare, a silent command to stay on script, then turned back to me with a sickeningly sweet, maternal smile. "Oh, darling," she cooed softly, reaching out to pat my knee with her manicured hand. "You see? This is exactly why you need me. You cannot handle the immense stress of Adler's vast estate. It is eating you alive from the inside. You are hallucinating, sweetie. People in our social circle are starting to talk. They are worried about you." I looked down at my hands, forcing my voice to tremble. "I do not know what is real anymore," I whispered, letting a single tear roll down my cheek. Fallon leaned back into the sofa cushions, clearly deciding that I was finally broken enough to manipulate. The trap was ready to snap shut. She reached into her designer leather bag sitting on the floor and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents. The paper was crisp and white. She slapped them down on the table right next to the modified smart speaker. "It is very simple, Marin," she said, her tone shifting from comforting to commanding. "All you have to do is sign these conservatorship papers right now. It gives me full, unrestricted power of attorney. I will take over the $40 million estate. I will manage Adler Tech, so you do not have to look at another spreadsheet. And you can just rest. We will send you to a beautiful, secure facility in upstate New York where the doctors can finally help you get better." I stared at the papers, acting horrified and confused. "But what about all the terrible debt?" I asked, my voice barely a squeak. "I saw the credit reports yesterday. Someone is opening accounts in my name. I am ruined." Fallon rolled her eyes, her mask of maternal concern slipping into pure, unfiltered arrogance. She felt far too safe in her own home. She thought she had already won the war. "Just sign the power of attorney, Marin. Stop fighting it. The $2,500,000 in credit card and loan debt is in your name anyway. I already took care of it. I structured the loans perfectly, so the federal banks think it is all you're doing. There is nothing you can ever prove." Tamsin chimed in, grinning maliciously, eager to rub salt in the wound. "Yeah, and Dr. Pryor already wrote the official medical certificate saying you are psychotic. He diagnosed you with severe paranoia and delusional disorder. Mom paid him $50,000 to expedite the paperwork and skip the actual evaluation. So even if you try to go to the police and cry about the bank debt, they are just going to look at your medical file and throw you in a padded room. You have zero leverage here, Marin. Just sign the stupid papers so I can finally pay off my Porsche." I kept my head down. I let out a soft, pathetic-sounding sob, burying my face in my hands. But under the cover of my fingers, I was not crying at all. My face was entirely blank, my jaw set. I was meticulously counting the seconds. My right thumb reached deep into the pocket of my oversized cardigan, pressing the small tactile button on my phone. The digital command shot through the cellular network, instantly saving the last 14 minutes of pristine audio, locking the file, and mirroring it across 3 separate offshore servers located thousands of miles away. They thought they had outsmarted the system. They had no idea that the system was sitting right in front of them, patiently recording every single breath they took. I slowly stood up, leaving the legal papers untouched on the glass table. I grabbed my tote bag, intentionally leaving the smart speaker exactly where it was. I looked at Fallon, dropping the fragile victim act entirely. My posture straightened until my spine was rigid. My voice stopped shaking and dropped an octave. "I will see you in court, Fallon," I said evenly, the icy coldness in my tone making her flinch backward. I turned on my heel and walked out of the condo, the heavy wooden door clicking shut firmly behind me. The trap was set. The digital evidence was secured. It was time for the final execution. The probate and conservatorship hearing was officially scheduled for a gloomy Tuesday morning. Federal courtrooms always have a very specific, intimidating atmosphere to them. They carry a distinct smell, a sterile mix of lemon floor polish, old paper, heavy oak wood, and nervous sweat. I arrived early, passing through the rigorous security checkpoints with my leather briefcase and my laptop. I walked into the designated courtroom and sat quietly at the defendant's table. I placed my hands flat on the polished surface, feeling the cool wood beneath my palms. Across the wide center aisle, Fallon and Tamsin were already seated with their high-priced attorney, a slick, overconfident man named Calder. Calder was the exact kind of lawyer who wore custom-tailored pinstripe suits, sported an expensive golden watch, and charged $800 an hour just to bully decent people into submission. He was organizing his files with a smug look on his face, occasionally whispering something to Fallon that made her nod seriously. Fallon was dressed for the part of a grieving mother. She wore a tasteful, conservative navy blue dress, minimal makeup, and held a lace handkerchief tightly in her hand. Tamsin wore a black blazer, looking unusually subdued, though I noticed her tapping her phone under the table. Judge Winslow presided over the hearing. He was an older, distinguished man with silver hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and a notorious reputation within the legal community for having zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics or unprepared lawyers. He adjusted his reading glasses, looked down at the massive stack of files placed in front of him by the clerk, and formally called the session to order. Calder stood up immediately, buttoning his suit jacket with a practiced, arrogant flourish. He stepped out from behind his table to begin his opening statement, fully intending to paint a tragic, entirely fabricated picture of my life for the court record. He spoke with a deeply serious, overly sympathetic tone, pacing slowly and deliberately in front of the judge's bench. "Your Honor, we are gathered here today to save a brilliant young woman from herself," Calder proclaimed, gesturing broadly toward where I was sitting. "Marin is a highly gifted cybersecurity architect. She has a bright future. But unfortunately, the sudden, overwhelming psychological pressure of inheriting a $40 million tech empire has caused her fragile mental state to fracture beyond repair. She is currently suffering from a severe, undocumented paranoid disorder that renders her incapable of managing her own daily affairs, let alone a massive corporate entity." Calder paused for dramatic effect, then pulled a crisp white document from his leather folder and held it up for the judge to see. He submitted the fake medical evaluation created by the disgraced Dr. Pryor. This is an extensive evaluation from a licensed medical professional detailing severe paranoid delusions, erratic behavior, and dangerous, self-imposed isolation. The doctor notes that she frequently experiences intense auditory hallucinations and firmly believes her own family is conspiring against her. My client, Fallon, who is Marin's own loving, devoted mother, is simply asking this court to grant her full conservatorship. Marin is a profound danger to her own assets and her own well-being. She desperately needs to be placed in a secure medical facility where she can receive round-the-clock psychiatric care, while her mother steps in to protect and preserve the family legacy. Right on cue, Fallon initiated her emotional performance. It was genuinely impressive to watch from an objective standpoint. She let out a sharp, choked sob that echoed in the quiet room, pressing the lace handkerchief firmly to her mouth. She slumped forward slightly in her heavy wooden chair, her shoulders shaking rhythmically, looking exactly like a desperate mother who is being torn apart by grief and worry. Tamsin put a comforting arm around her mother's shoulders, glaring across the aisle at me as if I were a heartless monster. The few random spectators sitting in the back gallery murmured in quiet sympathy. I did not move a single muscle. I did not glare back at Tamsin. I did not roll my eyes at Fallon's fake, theatrical tears. I did not shake my head in denial. I simply sat with my spine perfectly straight, channeling my grandfather's unwavering stoicism. I mentally counted my own heart rate. 65 beats per minute. Calm. Controlled. Steady. I watched them perform the same way I watch a piece of malicious malware attempting to breach a secure corporate firewall. You do not get angry at a digital virus for trying to infect a network. It is simply doing what its creator programmed it to do. Your only job is to observe its behavior, execute the quarantine protocol, and permanently delete it. Calder finished his grand speech, giving me a condescending, victorious smile before returning to his seat. He honestly believed he had won the case right then and there. He firmly believed that the forged medical document, combined with Fallon's dramatic tears, was more than enough to seal my fate, strip me of my fundamental rights, and hand over everything I owned. Judge Winslow frowned deeply, looking over the forged medical report with a critical eye. He then turned his intense gaze directly to me. His expression was a complex mix of professional skepticism and genuine, human concern. "Ms. Marin," he said, his voice echoing loudly, "you have chosen to represent yourself today, without outside legal counsel. Do you have a formal response to these very serious allegations regarding your mental competency?" The silence in the courtroom grew incredibly heavy. Everyone in the room was waiting for me to crack under the pressure. They were waiting for me to start screaming, to start wildly claiming it was all a giant conspiracy, to prove Calder's exact point by acting like a paranoid lunatic who refused to accept reality. But I had no intention of playing their rigged game. It was time to rewrite the rules of engagement. I stood up slowly from my chair, my face a mask of stone. I picked up my sleek silver laptop and a small, encrypted USB drive from the table. I did not look at Fallon or her expensive lawyer. I directed my attention entirely to the bench. "Your Honor, the plaintiff claims I am suffering from severe paranoid delusions. They claim I am a massive danger to my own inheritance and urgently need to be locked away in a psychiatric ward. They submitted a signed medical evaluation to prove this narrative. However, I have concrete, verifiable evidence that this entire legal proceeding is nothing more than an elaborate, criminally orchestrated fraud designed specifically to cover up massive federal financial crimes committed by the plaintiff." Calder shot up from his leather chair as if he had been physically burned, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. "Objection. Your Honor, this is outrageous. This is exactly the paranoid delusion we are talking about. She is making wild, baseless, defamatory accusations against her own mother to avoid medical treatment." "Overruled, Mr. Calder," Judge Winslow snapped sharply, his eyes narrowing at the lawyer. "This is a court of law, and she has the right to defend herself. Let her present her evidence. Proceed, Ms. Marin." I walked confidently toward the center podium, plugging my laptop into the court's audio-visual system using the provided cables. I clicked the mouse, bypassing my security passwords. The high-quality audio file I had recorded at the dinner just days prior began to play loudly through the courtroom's ceiling speakers. Because I had used high-end, modified hardware, the audio was crystal clear. There was no static, no background noise to mask the horrifying truth. Fallon's cold, arrogant, unmistakable voice echoed off the wooden walls, filling every corner of the room. "Just sign the power of attorney, Marin. Stop fighting it. The $2,500,000 in credit card and loan debt is in your name anyway. I already took care of it. I structured the loans perfectly, so the federal banks think it is all you're doing. There is nothing you can ever prove." The immediate physical reaction in the room was spectacular to witness. Calder froze instantly, his mouth hanging slightly open, staring at his own client in sheer, unadulterated horror. Tamsin physically jumped in her seat, knocking her expensive designer handbag onto the hard floor. The metal clasp clattered loudly against the wood, but nobody bothered to look down. Every single pair of eyes in the gallery was staring directly at Fallon. The recording continued seamlessly, transitioning to Tamsin's malicious, mocking laughter, and then right back to Fallon's smug confession. "Yeah, and Dr. Pryor already wrote the official medical certificate saying you are psychotic. He diagnosed you with severe paranoia. Mom paid him $50,000 to expedite the paperwork. So even if you try to go to the police, they are just going to look at your medical file and throw you in a padded room. You have zero leverage here, Marin. Just sign the stupid papers." I hit the pause button on my laptop. The ensuing silence in the courtroom was heavier than a block of lead. You could visibly see the blood drain entirely from Fallon's face. Her perfect, aristocratic posture crumbled in an instant. She gripped the edge of the wooden defendant table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. She looked like a ghost who had just realized she was dead. I did not stop there. I stepped away from the podium, reached into my leather briefcase, and pulled out the thick manila folder my private investigator, Hayes, had meticulously compiled. I handed 3 copies to the court bailiff, who passed one up to Judge Winslow and walked another over to Calder's desk. Your Honor, the documents contained within that folder represent a certified forensic audit conducted by a licensed investigator, I stated calmly, projecting my voice so everyone in the gallery could hear every single word. It details a massive, multi-year scheme of deliberate identity theft. Fallon has illegally utilized my social security number without my knowledge or consent to secure $2,500,000 in fraudulent business loans and secondary mortgages. Furthermore, on page 12, you will find the verified offshore bank routing numbers proving definitively that Fallon wired exactly $50,000 to a shell company owned by the wife of Dr. Pryor, precisely 3 days prior to him issuing the fake medical certificate submitted to this court today. Judge Winslow put on his reading glasses and began flipping rapidly through the pages of the audit. The deeper he read into the financial records, the darker and more furious his expression became. His jaw clenched tightly. A visible vein throbbed on his forehead. This was no longer a simple, unfortunate family dispute over a wealthy grandfather's will. This was a massive, heavily documented federal crime playing out right inside his courtroom, and his court had been used as an instrument for that fraud. Calder was practically hyperventilating. He looked at the bank transfer documents, looked at the undeniable proof of the $50,000 bribe, looked at his client, and quickly stepped 3 paces away from Fallon, physically distancing himself from the toxic fallout. He realized instantly that his own prestigious law license, his career, and his freedom were now in severe jeopardy for unwittingly submitting forged medical documents to a federal judge. Fallon tried desperately to salvage the unsalvageable situation. She stood up on trembling legs, tears streaming down her face, but this time, the tears were genuine. It was the raw manifestation of panic. "Marin, please," she choked out, her voice cracking pitifully. "Marin, I am your mother. You misunderstood the context of the conversation. We were just trying to protect you from yourself. We love you. Please tell the judge it is a mistake." I looked at her. I did not feel pity. I did not feel sadness or regret. I just looked at the virus that had relentlessly tried to destroy my entire operating system, fully exposed and neutralized in the bright light of day. "There was no misunderstanding, Fallon," I said quietly, ensuring my voice carried the weight of finality. "You just forgot that I am exceptionally good at tracking digital footprints." Judge Winslow raised his hand high in the air, demanding immediate silence. His face was a terrifying mask of cold, judicial fury. The gavel in his hand looked like a weapon ready to strike. Judge Winslow slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block with such immense force that it echoed through the room like a gunshot. The sharp, cracking sound made Tamsin flinch violently in her seat, letting out a small shriek of surprise. "This court is now in recess," Judge Winslow declared, his voice booming and shaking with pure, unadulterated anger. He pointed a rigid, accusatory finger directly at Fallon. "Do not move a single muscle, ma'am. Bailiff, secure the main doors. Let nobody in or out. I want the district attorney's office and the local Federal Bureau of Investigation field office on the phone right this second. We have textbook federal bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and perjury occurring within the walls of this courtroom." The power dynamic in the room shifted so rapidly and violently it was breathtaking to witness. Calder, realizing his entire lucrative career and his personal freedom were hanging by a very thin thread, scrambled frantically to pack his expensive leather briefcase. He shoved papers inside without looking. "Your Honor," he stammered loudly, his voice entirely stripped of all its earlier arrogance and polish. "I want the official court record to clearly reflect that my firm had zero knowledge of the fraudulent nature of these medical documents or the financial crimes detailed in that audit. I was lied to by my client. I am formally withdrawing as counsel for the plaintiff, effective immediately." He did not even spare a single glance at Fallon. He just turned on his heel and practically sprinted toward the side door of the courtroom, abandoning her entirely to the legal slaughterhouse she had built for herself with her own hands. Fallon collapsed backward into her wooden chair. Her legs simply gave out beneath her. The sleek, elegant, untouchable woman who had systematically tormented me for my entire life was gone, replaced instantly by a terrified, hyperventilating criminal facing decades behind bars. She looked wildly around the room, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with animalistic panic. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her privileged life, that there was no wealthy man coming to save her. There was no clever manipulation tactic left to deploy. The numbers were raw, verified, and undeniable. She turned to me. She abandoned all her pride, slid off her chair, and literally fell to her knees right there on the hard floor in the middle of the aisle. Her designer dress pulled around her. "Marin, please," she wailed, her hands reaching out desperately toward the hem of my skirt, though she did not dare actually touch me. "Please, I am begging you. Withdraw the digital evidence. Tell the judge it was a mistake, a terrible joke. If I go to a federal prison, I will die in there. I will not survive. Please, you are my flesh and blood. You cannot do this to your own mother." I took one slow, deliberate step backward, keeping a safe physical distance from her grasping hands. I looked down at her, analyzing her tears and her terror the exact same way I would analyze a failed line of code on a computer screen. "You spent 21 years telling me I was a mistake, Fallon," I replied, my voice steady, calm, and utterly devoid of any emotion. "You tried to poison my name to our relatives. You stole my identity and tried to steal my entire future to fund your own endless greed. And when that did not work, you bribed a doctor and tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my natural life. You always told me that weakness was a disease. You said it to me when I was 7 years old." I paused, letting the heavy silence hang in the air between us before delivering the final, crushing blow. "Today, you are dying from your own disease. I am not destroying you. You destroyed yourself. I am simply providing the documentation to the authorities." Tamsin was not crying for her mother. She was panicking entirely for herself. She frantically grabbed Fallon's shoulder, shaking her, her face twisted in selfish horror. "Mom, what about my black credit cards?" She shrieked loudly, her voice shrill and grating, entirely ignoring the 2 federal bailiffs who were quickly approaching their table. "What about my luxury apartment lease? You promised me everything was taken care of. You said I did not have to get a real job. How am I supposed to live?" Fallon just sobbed into her hands, ignoring her precious golden child for the very first time in her life. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 federal agents, who had been briefed hastily by the judge's clerks in the hallway, walked briskly into the room. They walked straight past the gallery and over to Fallon. They did not ask her nicely to stand up. They grabbed her by the upper arms, hauled her up from the floor, and spun her around forcefully. The sound of the heavy metal handcuffs clicking shut around her wrists was the most beautiful, satisfying sound I had ever heard in my 28 years of life. It was the sound of a massive firewall finally holding strong against a relentless attack. It was the sound of true, undeniable justice taking out the trash. As the agents marched her down the center aisle, her designer heels dragging awkwardly on the polished floor, she did not look back at me. She kept her head down, her shoulders shaking, fully broken. Tamsin followed closely behind her, screaming at the federal agents, demanding to know who was going to pay her phone bill and her car insurance, entirely oblivious to the severity of the multiple federal felony charges her mother was about to face. I calmly closed my laptop. I placed the silver USB drive back into its designated compartment in my briefcase and snapped the brass lock shut. I looked up at the bench and politely thanked Judge Winslow for his time and his swift action. I turned and walked out of the federal courthouse, stepping through the revolving doors and out into the cool, crisp Manhattan air. The morning rain had finally stopped, and the sky above the skyscrapers was a clear, brilliant shade of blue. For the first time since I was a little girl, I took a deep breath, and the air did not feel heavy in my lungs. It felt clean. It felt earned. The long war was finally over, but what happens when the dust settles and the rest of the family finds out? A week later, the digital and financial fallout from the courtroom revelation was immense and sweeping. The federal authorities moved swiftly, freezing every single bank account, trust fund, and asset associated with both Fallon and Tamsin. The $2,500,000 in fraudulent credit card debt and bad loans was quickly traced back directly to Fallon's personal IP addresses and forged digital signatures. Because of the overwhelming evidence I provided, the banks wiped the debt from my record, fully clearing my name and restoring my pristine credit score overnight. Fallon was swiftly denied bail by a federal magistrate due to being considered a severe flight risk and was remanded to a bleak federal detention center, where she sat waiting for a criminal trial that would likely result in decades of prison time for multiple felonies. Tamsin, suddenly and violently stripped of her endless, unearned cash flow, faced a harsh reality check. She was evicted from her luxury high-rise apartment within a month. Without Fallon to pay the exorbitant lease on her custom Porsche, it was repossessed in the middle of the night. She was forced to move into a tiny, rundown studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. She complained bitterly and endlessly on her social media accounts about how unfair her life was, until she eventually had to sell her expensive smartphone just to afford basic groceries. I returned to my quiet, structured life. I went back to the massive glass corporate offices of AdlerTech. I walked into the grand executive suite on the top floor and sat down in my grandfather's heavy leather chair. I looked out over the sprawling city skyline. The logistics company was thriving under my guidance. The complex security systems I built were flawless. But most importantly, the personal security grid of my own life was finally fully optimized and free of malware. Of course, not everyone in our extended family saw the situation through the lens of justice and logic. The flying monkeys, those same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had so eagerly believed Fallon's vicious lies about my mental instability, suddenly changed their tune when the truth came out. My personal phone buzzed endlessly with long text messages and voicemails calling me cold-blooded, ruthless, and entirely heartless. They said that sending my own flesh and blood mother to a federal prison was taking things a step too far. They argued that because I was already wealthy, because I had the $40 million inheritance securely in my name, I should have just quietly paid off her massive debts, accepted a fake apology to keep the peace, and let the family heal behind closed doors. They genuinely wanted me to sweep over 2 decades of severe psychological abuse and a multi-million-dollar federal fraud scheme under the rug, all just to maintain a fragile illusion of a happy family image. I read their long, guilt-tripping messages. I analyzed their flawed logic. Then I deleted every single message and permanently blocked their numbers from my phone and my servers. Every single one of them. This entire grueling ordeal taught me a profound, undeniable truth about the world we live in. Family is not simply defined by shared blood, identical DNA, or a common last name. Blood just means you are biologically related. True family is defined by the people who actively protect you when you are vulnerable. It is defined by the people who do not lie to your face, who do not steal your identity while you sleep, and who do not actively try to destroy your sanity just to fund their own selfish greed. My grandfather, Adler, was my family. The peaceful, secure life I built for myself with my own 2 hands is my family. Fallon spent 20 years desperately trying to convince me that I was the broken one, that I was the core problem in her life. She tried continuously to make me feel small, invisible, and crazy. But every single time she tried to break me down, she only forced me to build thicker, stronger armor. She thought she was easily manipulating a fragile, scared victim, but she was actually spending 2 decades training a cybersecurity architect exactly how to hunt down a predator. I am not the broken, paranoid failure she tried to convince a federal judge I was. I am the survivor she could not outsmart. The sprawling penthouse is mine. The tech company is mine. But above all else, the quiet, unbroken silence in my life is finally mine, and nobody will ever weaponize my own mind against me again. But before I sign off, I want to ask you all a question, because the angry emails from my distant relatives still sit quarantined in my spam folder. They honestly believe I went way too far. They believe I should have shown mercy and grace to the very woman who tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward and steal my future. What do you think? Was I wrong for refusing to settle out of court and sending my own mother to federal prison, or would forgiving her just be willingly signing my own death warrant? Have you ever had to cut a deeply toxic family member completely out of your life just to survive their abuse? Let me know your thoughts and share your own stories down in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you found this meaningful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss any of the crazy family dramas coming up next. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next video.